Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Mark Lambert and he's Sean Walsh.
Good afternoon.
So I'm joined by Dr. Sean Walsh, a one-time lecturer in the philosophy of the mind and an author and our friend and someone who writes very well, writes for Catholic Unscripted. You can read his stuff there. And also in other places, The Conservative Woman and Country Squire magazine. Is that it,
Yeah.
Sean?
No, I'm associate editor at Country Squire magazine. Recently appointed to that. I write for Conservative Woman, The Critic. I've had a few pieces in The Critic. I write for them regularly. Other places as well. Just whoever's silly enough to run my stuff, really. I'm quite lucky because I don't tend to. I do get commissioned occasionally, which I don't particularly enjoy, but I've written for enough people that I know that whatever mad thing I'm thinking about at the time, I can write about it and someone will run it. So I'm quite lucky in it.
Excellent stuff. Well, Catherine isn't with us, and that is mainly because we were mooting the idea of talking about Jimmy Kimmel's firing because you wrote an excellent piece on that, and she said to me, "I don't even know who Jimmy Kimmel is." So,
Oh, really?
said, perhaps the boys should get on with this one on our own. So, but we were discussing the funeral of Charlie Kirk, weren't we? Before we came on now. And that, I mean, the whole thing has been phenomenal, hasn't it?
It's been amazing from the perspective of just theology, really. When this obscenity happened, I didn't realize the seriousness of it. I sort of saw it, the story unfolding on Twitter, so I very stupidly watched the footage of the actual murder, which I regret, and I would certainly not watch that again. But it occurred to me at the time that what Charlie Kirk was involved in was staking out his ground on enemy territory, really, because I believe that the college campuses have been diabolically captured. I wrote about that I think that was for the Conservative Woman just after it happened, and it was clear to me that what Charlie Kirk was doing was a form of mission. That there was a sacramentality to it because he was doing it in person. Obviously, you have the sacrifice element and the pushback. And I described in one piece the wretched Tyler Robinson as being a kind of postmodern patsy in that we know he pulled the trigger, but in a sense it doesn't matter because it's clear to me that darker forces were in play. It's long been said, Mark, and it's true, and it was true even back in my day, 30 odd years ago, as an academic, that the campuses have been captured by ideology, but now it seems to me that the ideology that's captured the campuses has been captured by something spiritually darker. So theologically, that's been, you use the word phenomenal. I think that's not an unfair word. 12 days. And then we had the astonishing speech or eulogy, whatever the word is, by Erica, Charlie Kirk's widow, on the nature of forgiveness. And then the extraordinary mini pushback against that's going on now by saying, well, how can she forgive him but still want him punished? So people don't understand what forgiveness is. So this, as they say, is still a developing story. I think, and I thought this is almost as soon as it happened, that the Kirk murder could be a hinge point, that it could be historically pivotal. Partly because I phoned my 16-year-old son Ben was on the way back from the gym when the story was unfolding or was first being reported. He knew who Charlie Kirk was. He came home quite distressed, and he was saying to me, "Dad, they're saying in the groups that he's not dead. That he's being stabilized in hospital." I'd seen the footage. I knew that was not a survivable wound. And then when finally it was confirmed to Ben that it was, we had a beautiful half hour together praying. And he said to me the next day, he said that this could be God's way of bringing people back to the church, Dad, he said, because I think a lot of young people who knew who Charlie Kirk were are going to turn back to the faith or turn to the faith for the first time. So there's been beautiful stuff attached to this tragedy, but horrible nevertheless.
Yeah, really. My heart just broke listening to that eulogy from his wife. But just the idea, like someone who's experienced familial bereavement, it is just the most impossible thing to deal with, let alone to be up there, speaking in such powerful terms about forgiveness and stuff like that. And it is, you just have to be in admiration of her. But I wonder what that. I often wonder myself what that actually means. To forgive someone who has perpetrated such a terrible wrong against you. I mean, you can't let go of the need for justice, can you, in that sort of situation? But you have to stop it from eating away at you, don't you?
I think possibly it might help if we think again what love is, and if we remind ourselves that love isn't just about the way you feel about a person, but it's more an act of the will. So maybe in this situation, forgiveness means that her will is moving in the direction of wanting the good for this person who did it, despite the way she feels. I don't know. The moral psychology involved is kind of almost ineffably complex to me. I have not been in the tragedy of your situation, so I can't speak to that. What forgiveness means for Erica, who knows? But maybe she doesn't herself, but doesn't mean that announcement wasn't real. And God bless her for it. But the pushback has been, I say pushback, I've seen snarky comments on Twitter, which is, which you just expect anyway, of people not understanding what forgiveness is. They seem to think that means that she doesn't want the guy punished, which is, obviously a ridiculous conclusion to draw.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And like, as someone who worked in universities and understands that there is very much that Marxist neo-pedagogy, you might say, that sort of runs through.
Yeah.
I've struggled to understand, but I can't. Over the years that I've been bringing up children, it's something that you can't deny. It is a reality, and it seems to be from my only real experience of American institutions like that is from watching things like Charlie Kirk engaging with debates on campus, and that seems as prevalent in America as it is here. Obviously, it's cringeworthy watching the Oxford debates, not just with Charlie Kirk, but the way that the students behave these days just seems to me to be extraordinary. And what is at the root of? Can we have some insight into what is at the root of that? Like, I mean, it seems pretty simplistic. They always say, you get older and you get more conservative. But I don't think I've ever been in a place where it always seemed to me that the left were just saying, "Look, here's free money. Give us your freedoms." Like that always seemed to be really obvious. But they seem to. Is it as simple as the kids falling for the free money thing?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's darker than that. It was about when I was teaching. I was lucky though, because I was teaching. I mean, I taught miscellaneous philosophy courses, but my main stuff was in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind, philosophical logic. So these weren't, in those days, ideologically captured subdisciplines of philosophy. I did a little bit of philosophy of religion and some political philosophy. I wasn't particularly a person of faith at the time, so I was just teaching ontological proof and argument from design and all the problem of evil, obviously. But I wasn't goading them in the way that I would, that I could have done. Nowadays, it seems to me that every single discipline at the university is infected by cultural Marxism or wokeism or whatever you want to call it. Even maths, in some places seems to be affected by this, because this is what happens when you give up on the idea of truth. And this is the logical endpoint of the general relativistic trend in society and in education for a long time. So there has been a steady corruption and devolution of I mean, the old idea of the university was that students and lecturers were entrusted with this thing called knowledge, and the idea was to pass on that knowledge to to other generations. Um, it was a charge to keep. But that doesn't seem to be the idea anymore. So I think what you see now at, say, the Oxford Union is just the culture of repudiation, which is very much of the left, I think, run riot. And as a practical matter, it's almost impossible to get a 10-year job in a university in the West now unless you say the right things. And it's very difficult to earn a living outside of the academy. One of the first people to leave, of course, was Roger Scruton, who had a 10-year professorship at Birkbeck in London in aesthetics, so in philosophy. But he just found it intolerable and decided that it was spiritually and intellectually too constraining for him, so went off and wrote off his own back and became a freelance intellectual, if you like. But we're not all as gifted as Roger was, who I knew a little bit and was a wonderful guy. So I think you're right to be pessimistic. It's been a long time coming because the corruption has been in slow motion. I don't see any way out of it. My own 16-year-old son is not keen to go to university, in that he doesn't really talk about it as an option that much. And when I was his age, it was kind of just assumed that would, for a bright kid, that's where you went. Now I'm more than happy if he wants to do an apprenticeship or find a different path, because I think people go to university now to be captured. And if they are bright, to have that smoothed out of them or rubbed out of them or extirpated from them. I think they've become very depressing places indeed. And I think Charlie Kirk was at an advantage for not having gone or not having completed a college degree. Instead, I mean, he was an autodidact and took advice from people who were wise about what to read, and he had decent sounding boards. So that may have been part of his missionary strength.
That was amazing that he hadn't been educated. He hadn't benefited from a university education himself, and yet, he went to those very places in order to bring that debate to them.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's almost like a fresh perspective, isn't it? When you've been institutionalized by this sort of Marxist, leftist ideology that just says, and I've really noticed it. This has really brought it out online with even friends who, without really knowing that they were doing it, were happy to tacitly condone Charlie Kirk's murder because of his opinions. And until you broke it down and said, I've got one friend who I know is very left leaning, but he wasn't even really aware. When I started to break down what he was actually saying, he was kind of like, oh no, I'm not saying that. And then eventually he said, okay, I really shouldn't have said that. I really got that wrong.
Yeah, they're not aware.
Amazing, isn't it?
And it doesn't matter what those opinions were. And it's not true that it was his opinions that were the problem. I think it was more the case that it was the fact that he was going there in person and making conversation that was the problem. The methodology, the nature of the mission, rather than the content of what he was saying. The content of what he was saying was obviously, antithetical to the whole worldview of the people who were in charge of these universities. That's true. But I think it was more the fact that he was there on their. It's like what happened to what was the name of the? This is a very flippant metaphor, but I'll run with it anyway. What was the name of the George Cornell? George Cornell, who was shot by Ronnie Cray, and they say it was because of what he said to Ronnie Cray, but in fact he called Ronnie Cray a fat something or other. And so he said that's why Ronnie Cray shot him. The real story is that he was in The Blind Beggar, and he was off his patch, and he was on Ronnie's patch. That was the problem. And I think that was the problem with Charlie Kirk as well. As I say, a flippant metaphor, but that's kind of what I mean. They didn't want him there. The demons didn't want him there. That was their territory. And Kirk's bravery affronted them because he brought Jesus to them. And they so we can talk about the content of his opinions, but it was the kind of the fact that he went there with full of the Holy Spirit that basically meant they contracted out the hit to this kid Robinson. I think it's my view of the matter.
I notice this, like this is the way that I'm sort of tracking the teleology from my own experience, my daughter goes to a non-Catholic school. She's only 13, but and the vast majority of young ladies there are pro-choice, as they like to say, ultimately pro-abortion. And they've never, it seems, heard one of their number stand up and argue against abortion. And it's really quite shocking to them. And that is because we've got to this impasse where there's no one pushing back. There's no counter-cultural voice, is there, in our society that's offering, that's saying, well, is this moral? I mean, it seems really, if you're pro-life, it seems really obvious that, that abortion is deeply problematic. But it's fascinating that the young people don't have that degree of moral reasoning anymore, do they?
Because the people on the other side have captured the language. So you and I fall into the mistake of calling it pro-life versus pro-choice. That's not the right way to describe the issue. It's, if you don't want to go with good versus evil, then you use language which makes it clear that what's at stake is an infinitely valuable human life, and it's nothing to do with choice. You do not let them get away with the language of the debate. Similarly with the assisted dying thing. I'm calling it assisted dying. It's assisted suicide. It's easy to fall into the other side's trap about these things. We need to always re-sacralize the language of these debates, I think. Otherwise, we've lost them from the start.
So do you think this could possibly be a turning point, Sean?
Yeah.
Do you think that his death could have that much of effect that wake up the culture to even if it's just the possibility that other opinions have weight and merit?
Yes, I do. Because I think the evidence for that is the reaction of his the people who are not ideologically sympathetic to him, the hard left people. Look at the way they're reacting. It's not just that they're angry and affronted, it's that they're bewildered a little bit. So that kind of momentum of grievance took a few days to slow up, didn't it? They couldn't help but go. I think I said that there's a kind of determinism of malice in the hearts of some of these people, that they can't help but go on to Twitter or whatever social media space you want to talk about, and just be nasty. They couldn't help it, and it took them a few days before they actually stopped, because this was something new. And after a few days, they thought maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe our reaction isn't quite right. And I think they seem discombobulated. They don't seem to know what to do with it. And it's becoming clear that the normal human responses to this tragedy are unavailable in these people. And I think a lot of people have woken up to that. So the Jimmy Kimmel thing is interesting, because the narrative around that is that Trump's mate at the FCC has had Kimmel cancelled. Well, for one thing, Kimmel hasn't been cancelled. He's made himself unemployable, which is a very different thing. And for another thing, I don't think
Disney, isn't it? It's not the right that's cancelled him. It's Disney who sacked him because he lied.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But I mean, if we're going to look at the causal story, I think you need to look bottom up rather than top down. I think it's the ABC affiliates were worried about their advertising being withdrawn from local businesses, from plumbers, from local car washes. That seemed to be what their concern was, because ordinary people, blue collar America, are affronted, first of all, by the murder, and secondly, by the response to it. So yes, I think this is possibly a pivotal moment. I just get a sense of that more so than I have in recent years. So,
I think one of the further evidence of the problems, though, that we face perhaps more in the UK than, like, if America is waking up, please God, we'll follow suit. But I was watching the news at 10 on the BBC last night for sins, and Sarah Russell, who's the North America correspondent, was referring to Charlie Kirk as far right, which this is part of the problem, isn't it? And it's almost like the Overton window has moved so far now to the left that in order, if you're a centrist, you're right wing, and if you're in any way conservative, then you're far right.
Yeah. It's the linguistic capture, as mentioned a few minutes ago. It's also if we go back to when Leo was elected a few months ago, and the media were unable to view the whole thing except through the normal metrics of left versus right, secular politics. They just don't get some things. And what's happened with the whole Charlie Kirk assassination thing is it transcends that, I think. And I think that's in some ways cause for optimism. You're not going to expect anything else from the BBC. They can't help themselves. That determinism of malice is very much alive in every, in their DNA. I've given up on them.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed you were watching them, Mark. Is that your version of going on to enemy territory?
Yeah, well, I was on GB News on Sunday, so
Fair enough.
Fair enough. So the other thing that we were going to talk about is your piece in Country Squire, which I've got up here, which is about an accidental confession that you ended up. Tell us a little bit about
that. Well, the first thing to say is that I'm a recovering alcoholic who works a spiritual 12-step program in a certain fellowship. So that's the context of this. A couple of months ago, I went up to our local church, my church, on a Monday morning, just to sit and pray. That's kind of what I do if there's no mass on. And I was about to leave, and the priest appeared at the back of the church. Indian priest, that's relevant, because it's very difficult very minimal English this priest had. He's gone back to India now. But he said to me, I'm just about to, or at least I think this is what he said, I'm just about to celebrate Mass. Would you like to join me? You can't say no to God. So yes, with delight, I joined him. So it's just the two of us, and he's saying Mass. And then we got to communion, and he's approached me with the host. And then he's dipped it in the wine, in the blood of Christ, before offering it to me. Now, at this point, the alcoholic side of my brain becomes, a kind of sacramental zealot, and says it'd be perfectly fine, Sean, for you to take that, because you believe it's actually no longer wine, but it is the blood of Christ. And then the AA recovery side of my brain is saying to me, don't be silly, it's still under the appearance of wine, and it will have the same secular causal effects, so don't take it. So then I think there's a third option here, which is to take it, but then surreptitiously, because I knew he was going to turn his back on me as soon as he gave it to me, spit it out. But then if he caught me doing that, he's going to think I'm a Satanist, isn't he? So I'm smuggling the host out to do something else with outside of the church, which does happen around here, actually. And that's not a good option. It's probably worse than being thought of as an alcoholic, being thought of as a Satanist. But so I made the sign for a blessing, thinking I'd got out of it. So he gave me a blessing. And then when we finished, he came up to me and said, would you like to talk to me? I said, what about? He said, there must be something on your mind. And then I realized he thought I'd refused communion because I needed to confess. So
now, any normal person at this point would have explained what was going on, but you decided instead to go into the confessional and make up sin.
Yeah, it wasn't. Can I just say that with the available linguistic resources, it might not have been possible to offer him an explanation which he would have understood. So, but being mad, I went into the confessional with him, and I actually had to start by saying, "Bless me, Father, I have sinned. It has been 24 hours since my last," because
That's just making it seem much worse, isn't it?
I had been before the Sunday Mass.
So it's 24 hours, and you already can't go to Holy Communion.
Yeah. Now, occasionally I'll come out of reconciliation, and I have a bad thought. Attractive lady walks in, and you know where I'm going with that. But he must have thought I'd done something in 24 hours that was kind of a mortal sin level, which meant I was not in a state of grace and fit to.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, what can I come up with? So I'm making it worse, because now I'm tempted towards dishonesty in the confessional to justify being there. But even let's leave it this way: even with only 24 hours to work with, I had some raw material that I could come up with, which made a plausible confession, and I felt spiritually lighter for afterwards. But it was on my mind: do I need to go to another confession to confess what the circumstances of the previous confession were? But then I had to share in my fellowship meeting that this had happened, because I picked up a resentment about the fact that I'd already told this priest I was alcoholic, and he should have known better than to do the intincture thing with the host. So it was and I remember thinking, I don't know which is weirder, being a recovering alcoholic or being a Catholic, or if they're, which one's the stranger life. But it was all. I got an article out of it anyway, Mark. So I got a good laugh at my recovery meeting as well. So
Yeah, excellent.
But I mean,
So
it's an interesting thing, in terms of sacramentality. There, what does an alcoholic do when offered the blood of Christ? It's a kind of sacramental.
Is it wine or is it the blood of Christ?
Yeah. Well, the answer is it's the blood of Christ under the appearance
of wine.
and the appearance is going to retain that same imminent causality, which is going to give you a problem if you're a recovering alcoholic. I guess that's the theological compromise.
Nicely done.
Yeah, but it was touch and go. It was touch and go for a minute.
Because I know you obviously we've agreed that you're quite happy to talk about this, but as someone who doesn't understand it very well, I've got an uncle who's suffered with alcoholism, but would that be enough to trigger you, then to go and get a drink? It's not very nice to communion wine often, is it?
I without incriminating myself too much, I've had worse.
Right.
It's not a risk I would take, because it's a no-win situation. Because if I was to have taken that and there had been no adverse reaction, then the alcoholic part of me would be saying, "Oh, you can have a drink then.
You're over it." Yeah.
So it's best not to take the risk. I know people who are very careful when they go into hospital about what sanitizers are available. I know people who check perfume before they put it on. There's no alcohol in it. I suppose it's no worse than being a packet checking vegan. They have to be similarly diligent, but not with as quite as catastrophic physical consequences, perhaps. But it's not something I mind talking about at all. It's being recovering alcoholic is something I'm very grateful for, actually. One of the is the 12-step spiritual program is some people argue it's based on St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises. If you actually look at it, if you look at the 12 steps, alcohol's only mentioned once in step 1. The rest of it is kind of like I say, spiritual exercises, which probably most people could benefit from, actually. So in a way, we're lucky to have them.
So there is hope, basically. If anyone's watching this and they're struggling themselves, then what would you recommend that they do? Get help.
Yeah. If you are an addict or an alcoholic, then if you genuinely are an addict, then you aren't going to be able to get out of it yourself. Is my view. And you do what we should all do anyway, which is seek a power that's higher than you to get you through life on a day-to-day basis. I'm very fortunate that I have our Lord, and a lot of people come into our fellowship without that. They pick a different higher power and come to our Lord. A lot of people pick up the wrong higher power and go out and relapse. But if I was what they call in the fellowship a low bottom case. I was in 2015. A social worker had to come and take Ben away from me. I had to meet her in a car park in a small Wiltshire town. He was driven off to go and live with the wider family. My thought then was one of relief because it meant I could go to the pub. And at this point, I had nowhere to live. I was street homeless for several months after that, and then hostel homeless, and for 2 years technically homeless. If this program works for me, it can work for anyone. And there are people. I'm in the rooms with people who've in blackout committed murder and are now 35 years sober. So
Amazing.
we're not sure why it works, but it's the 12-step program, I think, is kind of part of what Robert Barron calls spiritual physics. You look at it from the point of view of secular physics, it's a massive, it's a collection of paradoxes that shouldn't quite work, but that's the spiritual life, and it's a spiritual program. And yeah, if anyone's suffering, then I would pick up the phone and speak to someone and get yourself into a meeting. Absolutely. And it's a wonderful life, actually, being a recovering alcoholic or recovering addict. So much comes back to you that you thought had gone forever, because the Holy Spirit is all powerful.
Thanks be to God. And like you said that you were an atheist when you were lecturing at university, and or an agnostic, would you say?
I'm not a person of faith. Well,
how
let me
did
clarify.
you journey? What was that journey? That's quite an interesting. That's not that long a period of time either, is it?
No, I think it was actually when I was homeless and living on the streets of Warminster, Westbury, Trowbridge, Bath, Melksham, finally Salisbury, where I found my way into a homelessness charity called Elaborate. I think it was there that I had the proper conversion of affection. I think it was there that God found me. And I was lucky enough to, because I was in such a bad spiritual place, I was listening for some reason. I was listening for something. So, grace invaded, and I was lucky enough to be in a position to respond. When I was teaching this stuff at university, I'm not sure if I was an atheist or an agnostic. I could see the arguments for God were good. I couldn't see what was wrong with them. I said before we started recording that I was always a contrarian. So I liked the fact that I had some scientists in my classes who thought there was a contradiction between faith and reason. So I kind of liked the fact that I could say, look at this stuff. This is good intellectual fare. But I didn't have the conversion to faith. I didn't have the conversion of affection going on. Yeah, so I think it was then. It was then when I was at my lowest point, really, that God reached out. And I think that's probably
Through
the
another
way.
person, Sean. Is that what you're saying? Like
I found my way. I found my way to Salisbury, and I started going to the Recovery Fellowship and another fellowship called Turning Point, funnily enough, which helps people with drug and alcohol problems. And I found my way into the hostel, which was a Christian charity hostel. All these things came together, and I felt at the time that was God reaching out. And I think that that was the right journey for me, because with all due respect to the theologians, I'm suspicious of the idea that you're going to find God in the conclusion of a syllogism. I think you have to have. I mean, I think apologetics is essential for it's essential that we have people who can do that work, and I like doing that work myself. I like talking about contemporary formulations of the ontological argument. It interests me, and I think they're good. But if God is God, he ain't going to be at the bottom of an argument. You need you need to be able to do that stuff. But there's you and I know there's more to it than that, because God's available to everyone. Not just the theologians and the logicians.
Well, and it's funny because like the epistemic arguments were certainly what captured my reason, if you like, at the beginning of my study. But and at the beginning, I would say like more pragmatic arguments, like Pascal's wager in particular, one that I really didn't like at the beginning.
No.
But I'd say it's almost my favourite now.
Really?
Does that make any sense?
Like
it seems like an ineffectual argument, doesn't it, when you first hear it? Like it's kind of like he's given up, isn't he? He's like, oh well,
I might as well believe in it, because what
Yeah,
have I
you
got
might
to
as
do?
well. But
Yeah,
but it's like there's something in it that a cri de coeur, that he's sort of saying, this is all there is, like that really captures me in that particular argument.
yeah, yeah. That's a good way of putting it, actually. That makes it sound more forceful than yeah. No, I can see that. For me, it's the
Like the level of
fine-tuning art.
exasperation with it's almost like it's his heart that's completely converted, and it's like, I can't be bothered to argue with you anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
Do you know what I mean? That's sort of that element to it. And I
and
feel like that myself sometimes now.
because he was a bit of a gambler, it was put in those terms.
Yeah.
Because he did have a gambling issue, didn't he, Pascal? I think.
Mm.
As did Dostoevsky, funnily enough. Yeah, I mean, I think the fine-tuning argument is the one that most interests me
Yeah.
now. The ontological proof always. I remember being, as an undergraduate in Belfast, we were being taught the ontological proof, and we were in a seminar, and I was friends with a guy called Donal, and the lecturer opened it up to the seminar. What do you think of Anselm's ontological proof? And Donal said, "Well, it's a bit of a word game, isn't it? It's like a bit of a crossword puzzle. It's a bit of a word game. Very clever, but just a word game." And this lecturer, Terry O'Keefe, his name was, bless him, he must be long gone now, just looked at Donal and said, "Well, actually, it's a fundamental fundamental problem of philosophy that's been with us for more than 1,000 years." But I'm still not convinced Donal was wrong.
On one level, yeah.
But there are
Excellent.
interesting reformulations of that. That came about in the 20th century in developments of modal logic and possible world semantics, and Kurt Gödel had a version of it, of course. Although it didn't
Yeah.
convince Kurt Gödel, because he was still fairly agnostic when he passed away. But he reformulated that argument in quite logically watertight ways.
Well, perhaps we'll have another session and go through the various our favourite arguments for the existence of God.
Yeah, the fine-tuning one for me at the moment, because of the work William Lane Craig's done on it. I think he's
Oh,
done
right, okay.
not a Catholic, of course, but an extremely effective Christian apologist, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly the most popular theory at the moment.
Yeah,
I think out there, isn't it? So yeah.
yeah.
Well, listen, Sean, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have you again. We'll have you on again very soon, I'm sure. Thank you for watching, everyone. And if you've enjoyed this, please do like, share, and subscribe, because it really does help our channel. And don't forget that you can find us and Sean's writing and our writing and all of our videos without adverts and all that sort of thing on catholicunscripted.com. Please do pick up a subscription if you can. It really helps us to do this work for you. So God bless, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Unscripted.
Thanks, Mark. God bless.